The transit pod smelled wrong. That was the first thing Dara Ose noticed when she stepped onto the platform of the Galactic Academy. Not the size of it, though it was enormous. Not the crowd, though there were dozens of alien species pressing past her in every direction. Just the smell. Too clean, too cold, like metal that had never once been touched by rain. She stood still for a moment with her bag on her shoulder and let the crowd move around her. She was the only human at the academy this cycle. She had known that before she arrived. Knowing it and feeling it were two very different things. Several students slowed down as they passed her. Some stared openly. A Delvari girl with soft blue light pulsing along her neck stopped completely and looked at Dara with wide, curious eyes before her companion pulled her along. Dara adjusted her bag strap and kept walking. The registration desk was manned by a tall, gray-skinned administrator who processed her documents without comment. He handed her a room assignment tile and pointed her toward the east wing without looking up. She found a room on the 3rd level. The door was already open. Her roommate was inside, arranging items on a shelf with all 4 of his arms working at once. He was Selvari, tall, scaled, with a wide flat head and eyes set far apart on either side of his face. He turned when he heard her step through the door and immediately went very still. His name was Ronan. She read it off the name tile above his bunk. "Hi," Doris said. "I'm Dade." Ronan said nothing for a moment. Then, carefully, as though reading from a script he had practiced, "You are the human." "Yes. I was told there would be a human. Were you okay with that?" He considered this with visible effort. "I have read about humans," he said finally. "You are from a high-gravity, high-predator world. Your pain tolerance is significantly above galactic average. You have been known to run toward danger rather than away from it." Dara put her bag down on the empty bunk. "We also make very good flatbread," she said. "So it balances out." Ronan stared at her. She could not tell if he understood she was joking. She decided it didn't matter. Orientation was held in the main atrium the following morning. Instructor Bavel, a short, dense-bodied being with 3 rows of small dark eyes, led a group of new students through the academy's key facilities. Labs, lecture halls, the observation gardens. Standard things. Then he led them into the containment wing. The corridor was cooler here. The walls were thicker. Students pressed together instinctively as they walked past chambers marked with yellow and red symbols. Most of the chambers held creatures that were sedated or distant or simply uninterested in the students watching them through the reinforced glass. A large blue-green predator from the outer rim slept in a coiled heap. Something translucent and many-limbed drifted in a tank of dense fluid. Then they reached Chamber 7. The creature inside was massive. It stood on 4 thick legs, with 2 more limbs folded against its upper body. Its hide was dark, almost black, with faint patterns beneath the surface that moved slowly like heat ripples on a road. Its head was broad and low, and its eyes, when it turned, were a deep, dull amber. IT was called a Kareth. Instructor Bavel said so quickly and moved on, gesturing for students to keep walking. Most of them did. The creature had not moved, and there was nothing obviously dramatic to look at. Dur did not keep walking. She stopped in front of the glass and looked in. The Kareth was standing near the back wall. It had not reacted to the group passing. It did not pace. It did not posture. It simply stood in the way that very tired things stand, like the effort of holding itself upright was something it had simply decided to keep doing without any particular reason. Then it turned its head that IT looked directly at Dara. Not at the group. Not at the glass in general. At her. For 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. "Student." Warden Sethi's voice came from behind her. He was not part of the orientation group. He had simply appeared, the way people in authority sometimes do, at exactly the wrong moment. He was broad across the shoulders with a flat, unreadable face. "Move along with the group." Dara looked at him, then back at the Kareth. Then she moved. That night, she lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling while Ronan slept across the room, all 4 arms tucked close to his body. She thought about what she had read in the introductory materials. The Kareth was the last of its kind in captivity. Its homeworld was gone. It had been at the academy for most of its life. The file used words like aggressive and non-communicative and extreme containment risk. She thought about its eyes. They weren't the eyes of something that wanted to hurt anyone. They were the eyes of something that had been alone for a very long time, in a room that smelled wrong, surrounded by things that kept walking away. Dara understood that feeling better than she expected to. She turned over and closed her eyes. Outside the window, the Academy's artificial lights hummed on through the dark, steady and cold, and completely indifferent to everything beneath them. The archive room was cold and smelled like old data. Ronan found Dara there at 3 in the morning, sitting cross-legged on the floor between 2 rows of shelves, surrounded by data slates. She had pulled every file the Academy had on the Carrot species. Most of them were thin. A few were heavily redacted. One was a damage report from 6 years ago, with detailed descriptions of what Specimen 7 had done to a reinforced wall when a maintenance crew had triggered the overhead lights without warning. Ronan stood in the doorway and looked at her for a long moment. "You are not sleeping," he said. "Correct," Dara said, not looking up. "Humans require sleep. I read this. Humans also read things at 3 in the morning when something is bothering them." She turned a slate over in her hands. "Go back to bed, Ronan." He stood there a little longer, then quietly crossed the room and sat down on the floor beside her. He did not say anything else. He picked up one of the discarded slates and looked at it. She didn't tell him to put it down. That was how they stayed for an hour. Her reading, him slowly reading too, the archive room humming faintly around them. What Dara found was not a mystery. It was something much simpler and sadder than a mystery. It was a pattern that no one had bothered to look for. Specimen 7, the file said, had been brought to the Academy at approximately 2 years of age. Young for a Kareth, which in the wild lived in large extended family groups. It had been housed immediately in containment due to its size and species classification. It had shown elevated stress responses from the beginning. As it aged, those stress responses had escalated into what the Academy formally called aggression incidents. 3 handlers have been hurt over the years. Not badly. 1 fractured arm, 1 concussion, 1 case of deep bruising across a technician's ribs. But each incident had added another note to the file. More warnings, higher containment ratings, fewer visits. Dara mapped the incidents against the maintenance logs and the observation schedules. It took her about 40 minutes to see what she was looking for. Every single spike in Voral's behavior had been preceded by 1 or more specific triggers. Sudden bright lights, high-frequency metallic sounds, multiple beings pressing close to the glass at once. Not random rage. Not an aggressive species behaving true to type. A frightened animal responding to things that scared it. She brought this to Instructor Babel the next day, after his morning lecture. She laid the data out on his desk, organized, referenced, clear. He sat back in his chair and read through it slowly. He was quiet for a long time after he finished. "You found this in the open archive?" he asked. "Yes," Doris said. "It's all there." No one cross-referenced it. Babel was quiet again. Then he said, carefully, "You are not wrong. The pattern is consistent. A competent ethologist looking at this data would reach the same conclusion you have. So what happens now?" He looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. "Warden Sethi manages the containment wing. He has managed it for 19 years. He has a file that tells him Specimen 7 is dangerous, and 3 injury reports that confirm it. He will not reframe that based on a first-year student's late-night archive review." He paused. "I am sorry." Dara picked up her data slates. "Okay," she said. She didn't argue. She didn't push. She thanked him for his time and left. Naira was waiting outside the instructor's door. The Delvari girl from the platform, the one who had stared during orientation. She had introduced herself to Dara 2 days ago in the dining hall and attached herself to Dara's general orbit with the cheerful persistence of someone who had already decided they were going to be friends regardless of what the other party thought about it. He said no. Naira said. It was not a question. He said Sethi would say no. Naira's bioluminescence pulsed faintly along her neck. "I can get you observation access," she said. "There's a scheduling loophole in the off-hours maintenance window. Technically, the observation corridor isn't restricted if you're not approaching the chamber itself." Dara looked at her. Why are you helping me? Naira tilted her head. Because you sat in the archive until 3 in the morning reading damage reports to figure out why a lonely animal was scared. She shrugged her narrow shoulders. That seems like the kind of person worth helping. Dara started visiting Chamber 7 during the off hours. She did not try to make contact. She did not speak or tap the glass or do anything that might register as a stimulus. She just sat down near the observation window and read from a data slate, the way she might sit in any quiet room. The first visit, Vorel paced the length of the chamber twice and did not look at her. The second visit, it stopped pacing and stood near the far wall, watching her. The third visit, it came closer to the glass and settled onto its haunches 5 meters away, watching her read with those tired amber eyes. When her access window ended and she had to leave, she stood up slowly, nodded once at the glass out of habit, and walked back down the corridor. She did not know if Vorel understood the nod. She thought maybe it understood the leaving. The way she always came back. She hoped that was enough to mean something. It started with a sound that nobody heard. Somewhere behind the walls of the containment wing, a power relay that had been running slightly hot for several weeks finally gave out. It did not spark. It did not trigger any alarm. It simply stopped working, and the brief interruption of current that followed lasted 11 seconds before the backup systems kicked in. 0.11 seconds was enough. The magnetic lock on Chamber 7 cycled off, and then on again. In the logs, it would show as a micro fault. Routine. The kind of thing that got flagged for maintenance and forgotten, except that in those 11 seconds, the door to Chamber 7 opened. Vorel did not move immediately. It stood in the open doorway and looked out at the corridor, the way something looks at a place it has never been allowed to go. The air was different out there. The smell was different. For a moment, it simply stood, breathing. Then the alarm system registered the open door. The klaxons fired. Red emergency lights began strobing through the corridor at 2-second intervals. Vorel flinched hard at the first alarm burst. Its whole body dropped into a low crouch. Instinctive, the posture of something that expects to be struck. The lights strobed again. A second klaxon joined the first, higher in pitch, designed to be heard through thick walls. Exactly the kind of sound that Dara had documented in her archive research. Exactly the kind of sound that the file logged as a primary trigger. The carrot that had been standing still in a doorway began to move. The evacuation order came through the academy-wide channel 30 seconds after the alarm. Students in the corridors moved fast. Instructors shouted directions. The containment wing sealed its outer doors automatically, trapping the incident inside, but the inner corridors were a different matter. Warden Sethi arrived at the emergency response center in under 2 minutes. He pulled up the camera feeds and looked at what was happening and did not waste time being surprised. He called in 3 response teams. He ordered the tranquilizer drones deployed. He ordered barrier fields set at junction points to create a corridor that would funnel Vorel back toward its chamber. The plan was sound. It should have worked. That IT didn't work because Vorel was not behaving like the file said it would. The file described a creature that attacked in straight lines. What Sethi was watching on the feeds was a creature that was panicking. It was not charging. It was thrashing, slamming into walls, reacting to every strobe of the emergency lights with full body flinches that sent it careening sideways. When the first barrier field went up, Vorel hit it hard and tore a section loose. When the trank drones moved in, the high whine of their motors sent Vorel into the wall so hard that a 2-meter section of plating buckled outward. One of the drone operators in the adjacent corridor did not get clear in time. The buckled plating caught him across the shoulder and knocked him down. Not fatal, not even critical, but serious enough that 2 of his teammates had to break position to help him. The containment net was falling apart. Ronan was in evacuation shelter 4. When he realized where Dara had to be, he had not seen her in the corridor during the evacuation. He had looked, and she had not been there. And he knew, because he had started paying attention over the past 2 weeks, that Dara had been using the off-hours access window to visit the observation corridor. That window was right now. At this exact time of morning, she had been in the containment wing when the alarms went off. Ronan stood up. Naira grabbed his arm with 3 of her 6 fingers. "Don't," she said. "She is in there." You going in there doesn't help her. Ronan looked at the sealed evacuation shelter door. He sat back down, his four hands folded together in his lap, and he stared at the floor and said nothing, because Naira was right, and it was the worst feeling he had ever had. Dara heard the klaxons from the observation corridor. She had pressed back against the wall when the strobing started, her data slate gripped in both hands. Through the observation window, she could see Chamber 7's open door. She could hear the sounds further down the corridor. Heavy impacts, the shriek of tearing metal, the alarm layering on top of itself until it was less a sound and more a physical pressure in the chest. She could not get to the evacuation route. The inner corridor junction had sealed during the lockdown sequence. She was here until it either opened or someone came for her. She looked at the unsealed door on her left, the one that connected the observation corridor to the inner wing. She thought about the data she had spent 2 weeks reading, about the triggers, about what the file called aggression, and what she had come to think of as fear with nowhere to go. She thought about 3 visits and a creature that had stopped pacing and started watching. She was terrified. That was important to say honestly, even just to herself. Her hands were not steady, and her breathing was fast, and she could hear something enormous moving in the corridor beyond that door. She looked at her hands. She made them still. Then she reached out, pushed down the handle, and opened the door herself. The corridor was dark except for the red strips along the floor. The alarm was still going. Dara could not do anything about the alarm. She stepped through the door and let it close softly behind her and stood still for a moment while her eyes adjusted. Vorel was at the far end of the corridor. The IT had stopped moving. It was pressed against the wall with its lower body low to the ground and its upper limbs pulled in close, the way very large things make themselves small when they are frightened. Its head was turned toward her. The amber eyes caught the red light from the floor strips and held it. Every muscle in the creature's body was coiled. Every line of it said, "I will explode in any direction if anything comes toward me." Dara did not go toward it. She sat down on the floor. Not slowly and carefully, the way people move when they're trying to seem calm but aren't. She just sat, the way she might sit in the archive room or in a corridor waiting for a lecture to start. She put her data slate in her lap. She breathed out once, long and slow, and let her shoulders drop. She was still scared. That did not go away. But she had learned something in her life about fear, which was that you did not have to stop being afraid to act like you weren't a threat. She kept her gaze low and soft, not looking away from Vorel entirely because that felt wrong, but not meeting its eyes directly either. Somewhere in between, the way she had read about in old Earth texts about working with wild animals. You look at the space near them. You say with your body, "I see you. I'm not pretending you're not there, but I'm also not a danger to you." The alarms kept strobing. Vorel did not move. In the emergency response center, Warden Sethi had been watching camera 7C when the door at the end of the inner corridor opened. He had watched a small human figure step through and sit down on the floor. He had gone absolutely still. "Who is that?" he said. One of his staff checked the corridor assignment logs. "First-year student. Xenobiology track." A pause. "She has an off-hours observation permit for the adjacent corridor." "She is not in the adjacent corridor." "No, sir." Sethi reached for the team communication panel. He was going to order a retrieval. 2 officers, fast entry, get the student out before the Kareth decided to move. Instructor Bavel put his hand on the panel first. Sethi looked at him. "Wait," Bavel said, quietly. "Not a challenge. Just a word. Look at what it is doing." Sethi looked at the feed. Vorel had not moved. In the minute and a half since Dara had sat down, the creature had not taken a single step toward her. Its posture was still tight, still ready, but it had not charged. For an animal the file described as reacting to proximity in seconds, this was notable. "If your team goes in there," Bavel said, "they will move fast, and they will make noise, and everything she has just accomplished in the last 2 minutes will come apart." Sethi's hand stayed on the panel. The alarm kept going. He waited. Dara did not know how long she sat there. Long enough that the fear settled from something sharp into something dull and manageable. Long enough that the strobing lights became just lights and the alarm became just sound. Vorel watched her the whole time. She noticed, after a while, that it had stopped pressing against the wall. Not much, but its weight had shifted. The coiled, explosive tension in its limbs had eased by some small amount. It was still ready, but it was also watching her the way it had watched her through the glass on her third visit. With something that was at least partly curiosity, she thought about what it must have seen in its life. This room and the one before it. Handlers who moved fast and smelled like stress. Lights that hurt and sounds that scared and nothing that ever just sat still. She turned her data slate over in her hands. She wasn't reading it. She just held it because having something to do with her hands helped. Then she did something she had not planned to do. She turned her palm up and rested her open hand on the floor in front of her. Fingers loose. Not reaching. Not asking. Just there. The way you put your hand out near a frightened animal and wait to see if the animal decides, on its own, that this is safe. The Academy's protocols had no entry for this. There was no chapter in the containment manual about sitting on a floor in the dark with an open hand and no plan. Vorel looked at the hand and IT looked at Dara's face. Then, with a slowness that felt almost careful, it began to move toward her. One step and a long pause. Another step. It stopped twice and just stood, watching, checking. The way something moves when it is deciding with every single footfall whether this is still safe. IT crossed the corridor. IT lowered its enormous head until it was level with Dara's hand, and then it rested very gently, the side of its jaw against the floor near her open fingers. Not on her hand. Near it. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from it. From the response center, Warden Sethi watched and said nothing. Instructor Bavel exhaled. The alarm kept going, but in that corridor, it felt very far away. The footage had been reviewed 11 times by the time Dara arrived at the administrative hall the next morning. She knew this because Naira had been up since before dawn checking the staff communication channels, and she had met Dara outside the dormitory with this information and a flat, serious expression that meant the day was going to be complicated. Dara had slept 4 hours. She felt functional. She walked into the administrative hall and sat down in the chair across from Warden Sethi's desk and waited. Sethi did not make her wait long. He came in, set a data pad on the desk, and sat down with the energy of someone who had also slept very little and had spent that sleepless time deciding exactly what he was going to say. He said it clearly and without unnecessary drama. She had violated the evacuation order. She had entered an active containment incident without authorization. She had made direct, unsanctioned contact with a Class 6 specimen. Each of these was a serious infraction. Taken together, there were grounds for suspension from the xenobiology track and potentially dismissal from the academy. Dara listened to all of it. When he was finished, she said, "I understand. Everything you just listed is accurate." Sethi looked at her. He had expected more resistance, and a lack of it seemed to make him cautious. "You agree that you broke protocol?" "Yes. I also think the outcome was better than what the deployed teams were achieving, but I understand that doesn't erase what I did." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "It does not." The formal reprimand was filed. She was not suspended. He left that option open without saying so, which she understood was the closest thing to a concession she was going to get from him in that room. The real argument came 2 days later. Sethi proposed in a faculty meeting that Dara was not invited to, but heard about in detail from Instructor Bavel, that Specimen 7 should be transferred to the Outer Reach Containment Facility. A newer building, higher-rated chambers, more specialized staff. The breach, he argued, had demonstrated that the Academy's current setup was not adequate. Bavel brought Dara in to present her data to the faculty. She stood at the front of a room with her cross-referenced maintenance logs and her incident maps and her 18 pages of behavioral analysis, and she explained, in simple and careful language, that Vorel was not a containment problem. It was a welfare problem. Every documented aggression incident traced back to a stimulus. Every stimulus was something that could be managed. The creature had never, in 20 years, attacked without provocation. The file called it dangerous because no one had stopped to ask what it was afraid of. 3 faculty members were visibly persuaded. 2 were cautiously sympathetic. 1 asked how she knew this wasn't just animal conditioning, a stress response that would reassert itself unpredictably. She said she didn't know for certain, and that certainty would require time and observation, which was exactly what she was asking for. Sethi said, "You are a first-year student." "Yes," Dara said, "and this is data. The data doesn't change based on who compiled it." He did not respond to that. She could not tell if it had landed or not. The students had been watching. Ronan, who had barely spoken about the incident since Dara came back safely from the inner corridor, spent the following days in quiet conversation with other students in the common areas. Not organizing anything, not making speeches, just talking, telling people what he had seen on the shelter feeds, telling people what Dara had been doing for weeks before the breach, telling people, in a measured, careful way he did most things, that the Academy's own founding documents included a commitment to the ethical study and protection of all species, and that a 30-year misreading of one animal's behavior seemed worth at least examining. Naira was less quiet about ITW. By the end of the week, there were 40 students who had filed individual observation requests for Chamber 7, knowing they would be denied, for the sole purpose of creating a documented paper trail of interest. It was Naira's idea. Dara had not asked her to do it. The administration agreed to a 30-day review period. Sethi's transfer proposal was paused. Dara was granted supervised access to Voral during the review window. Bavel was assigned as her faculty supervisor. The terms were narrow and carefully worded and included 17 conditions that all amounted to, "We are watching you." Dara agreed to all of them. On the first supervised visit after the review period was approved, Bavel walked with her to the observation corridor and waited while she approached the window. The chamber door was sealed, as it was supposed to be. Everything was in order. Voral was at the glass before Dara reached it. Not pacing, not pressed against the far wall. It had come to the front of the chamber and settled there, low and still, waiting, like it had known the schedule, like it had simply been waiting for her to come back. Bavel made a note in his data pad and said nothing. Dara put her hand flat against the glass. Voral pressed its jaw against the other side. 30 days, Dara thought. She had 30 days to show the Academy what she already knew. Not a miracle, not a mystery, just a living thing that had needed someone to sit still long enough to actually look at it. She could work with 30 days. 30 days passed the way difficult things sometimes do when you're paying close attention to every hour of them. Dara did not spend the review period trying to impress anyone. She spent it doing the same thing she had been doing before the breach, showing up, being still, and paying attention. She asked Bavel to help her implement small changes to the chamber environment. The emergency light setting was adjusted so that maintenance alerts used slow amber pulses instead of strobing red. A sound buffer was added to the corridor junction to reduce the metallic echo that Voral reacted to worst. Staff movement protocols near the chamber were slowed down and made quieter. None of these were dramatic changes. None of them cost much. They were the kind of changes that would have been obvious 20 years ago if anyone had been looking. Voral responded the way frightened things respond when the source of their fear is removed. Slowly, and then all at once. By the end of the second week, it was sleeping through the night. By the end of the third week, it was eating full portions at regular hours for the first time in the Academy's recorded logs. Bavel found an old Kareth ethology study in an archive database no one had consulted in 15 years, and in it was a catalog of Kareth vocalizations. He cross-referenced it against the sounds Voral had started making during Dara's daily visits. Most of them translated to variants of a single concept, proximity that is not a threat. The creature was in the language of its own extinct species, saying that she was safe to be near. The council walkthrough took place on the final day of the review period. 12 faculty members and 3 senior administrators came to the containment wing in the morning. Sethi was among them. He stood a little apart from the others, as he usually did, with his flat expression giving nothing away. Dara stood inside the open habitat enclosure. The door was open at her back. No barrier field. No restraint drone on standby. Just her and the space and Voral moving freely around her. The council watched from behind a viewing barrier. Voral moved the way it had been moving for the past 2 weeks, with a kind of settled ease that none of the observers had ever seen from it. It walked around Dara without urgency. It paused near her twice, once to press its jaw briefly against her shoulder once simply to stand close and breathe. Then it crossed to the far side of the habitat and lay down. Nobody in the viewing area spoke for almost a full minute. Then one of the senior administrators said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "It has never laid down during an observation session. In any record we have." "No," Bavel said. "It has not." The formal vote was held that afternoon. Sethi spoke before the vote. He stood at the front of the council room and acknowledged, without apparent discomfort, that the threat assessment on Specimen 7 had been incorrect. Not that it had been his fault or anyone's specific fault. Simply that it had been wrong, and that the data now said so, and that he had reviewed the data and agreed. He recommended removal of the Class 6 threat designation and supported retaining the Kareth at the Academy under a new framework that IT was the most Dara had ever heard him say at once. She was not sure she had expected it. The vote was unanimous. At the end of the meeting, the council asked Dara what name should be entered into the official record for the newly designated protected ward. She had been thinking about this for a week. "Voral," she said. "It's from Old Kareth. It means endurance." The administrator at the recording desk typed it in. It was the first time the creature had ever had a name in an Academy file. Ronan walked back to the dormitory with Dara that evening. The Academy's artificial sky overhead was cycling from orange to dark, the way it did every night at this hour. For a while they walked without talking. Ronan had 4 hands and a tendency to fold them all together when he was thinking, which is what he was doing. "I still do not fully understand how you did it," he said finally. Dara thought about it honestly before answering. "Back on Earth, we spent a long time being afraid of things we didn't understand. Big things, mostly. Things that could hurt us. We built walls. We made rules. Some of us learned a different way." She paused. "Not enough of us, but some." Ronan was quiet for a moment. "The different way," he said. "Is it always sitting on a floor in the dark?" Dara almost smiled. "Sometimes. Mostly it is just deciding that the thing you are afraid of is worth understanding more than it is worth avoiding." Ronan considered this with the serious attention he gave to everything. "That seems dangerous," he said. "It is," Dara agreed. She looked back once toward the containment wing before they rounded the corner. The lights in that section of the building were the new amber. Slow and warm. Through the wall, somewhere in the modified habitat with its quiet corridors and its adjusted protocols and its one name on the door, the last Kareth was sleeping without fear. Not fixed. Not healed. Just resting for the first time in a very long time, in a place that had finally decided to pay attention. That was enough. For now, that was enough.